It's a real pleasure and an honor to have these colleagues and friends with me at this table. It's also, I think, an exceptional occasion for you to listen to them, and I hope really enjoy the session. It's been for about 1.5 years that we started, that I joined, in fact, a group that they were already working together, and group or no group, in fact, these two colleagues, Lina Farrouki and Viola Raheb, are committed people with what they do. Not only they do as practitioners and as scholars, but also they are socially and politically committed to what they do. And this is why this session has this double angle that I think is so necessary in general, but especially about the issue we're going to talk about. As you could see, the title of the session is The Multiple Phases and Challenges for the Education of Children in the Post-Conflict in the MENA region, Middle East and Northern Africa, okay? And Turkey, we could add, because of course it's all that area in the Mediterranean that is involved, and also Northern and Western European countries receiving and involved in the conflict and in the post-conflict era. And we are going to focus on an international debate, but which is absolutely grounded and may illuminate many of the issues we're dealing with on an everyday terms in all our societies, but there, in that area specifically, and during the conflict and the post-conflict, really many of the issues we may be ambivalent about are coming out. So it's more than we can learn, not only about the area, not only about their work, not only about they aspire to achieve, but also we can draw lessons from what is going on there in general terms of what is education, what are children's rights, what is education for in this global world. And in fact, we're going to focus on absolutely different two sides of the coin, let's say. On the one hand, what happens with education understood as indoctrination, correct me if I'm wrong, and on the other side, on education understood as hope, as the tools for emancipation, critical thinking, personal realization, and social cooperation. So it is very interesting because, as you see, if we do not mention the region we're focusing on, this is an international debate that's going on. But when we try to see this from the grounds of conflict and the post-conflict, maybe many of the learnings can be universal as well as local. This is why it is so important for me and such a pleasure to share this table and have had the possibility to bring these two colleagues and friends to these seminars we're holding these 2 days. You'll see there's one person missing on the table because another colleague from our university and research center was expected to be here, but there was a change in the time schedule and he could not make it. He's teaching currently. So Professor Masoud Sharifi, you can meet him if some of you are staying for dinner or maybe you come later to other sessions. He can make it to come later too, but he's unfortunately not participating, not giving us this overview of what has happened in the region. So that's why I've asked my two colleagues to provide some context before they introduce the specifics of their presentations. We're going to proceed in the following way. First of all, Mrs. Lina Farrouki is going to explain what they are doing in Jordan as one of the most important receiving countries and the direct border to where the conflict in Syria started. We had the pleasure to be with her to visit many of these programs that they are undertaking on the ground, very close to the Syrian borders, in camps, but also in villages, and last November. And she's going to talk about all the program, all the let's say the goals, and also the difficulties and barriers that they are encountering, the challenges, and how they are overcoming them. And I think it is really, really exceptional what they're doing, and it's absolutely unknown in Europe, so we should also learn from what they're doing there. And after this first presentation, Professor Viola Raheb is going to, who's from the University of Wien, but she's from Palestine, She's going to talk about her research on school textbooks, and as you see, the title of the presentation is A Contested Arena in Times of Conflict, and that's the other part, the part of the other side of the coin we were talking about, and this is really important and also exceptional. I think it's the first time in Barcelona we can hear about that, so I'm really eager to listen to your presentation, although I've come to know a little about your work, and that's why you're here too. So I do not need to use any more words, because the important issue here is to let my colleagues talk and then to engage all of us in a fruitful debate after that. So the floor is yours, Lina, when you're ready. I think the mic is also on, maybe? It's on. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, and thank you for hosting us and to give you more information about how things are going in the field, in the real life of having refugees in a country, and how we work with them and how we establish our contacts with the government. MECI is MECI, which is it's abbreviation for Middle East Children Institute. It's a 501c3 public tax exempt organization. We start this NGO, INGO, in New York in 2005. 2007, we start implementing a program in the West Bank in a village called Beit Rima next to Ramallah, where we do remedial education for the students in that village. Having said so, these students, they come after school work, and they start taking Arabic, English, music, PE, to improve their educational aspect. In 2013, this is where we established the MECI Jordan, where we felt there's a need of such a program of remedial education, informal education in Jordan, after we had the Syrian refugees coming to Jordan, and the influx was very high. And we felt there's so many students who are out of school and would not be able to attend the regular schooling due to the number of students that have fled to Jordan and due to the capacity of the public schools in Jordan. So we start the program for the informal education in 2014. Prior to starting the program, we did the curriculum that is needed for these students, and we made it very simple: Arabic, English, math, in addition to PE and art. PE is physical education and art, a little bit of music. The students we had, around 900 students. Our target was 900. We achieved 1,084 students. We were giving them the needed academic part, as well the PE and art. Maybe the art, we all think that it is important, but we say it's extremely important to give them the art, because this is where we saw that their anxiety, their trauma that they went through crossing a border from Syria to Jordan, they could express themselves in that part. The success was so high with, getting, the target was 900. We went above the 900. We got 1,084 students attending our program in 3 schools in the middle of Jordan, with the help and the full support of UNICEF for this project. And they asked us for increasing our number from 3 schools to 6 schools, and the total number of students is 1,800 students for that period in 2015. And we saw that the improvement of their behavioral improvement was so high, in addition to their academic had improved since they started the program with us, with MECI. We don't only look at academics, we also look at the psychosocial, but in addition to this, we also wanted the social cohesion between the 2 countries to be able to really get together. So what we did is having the parents, awareness sessions with the parents on education, on health and hygiene, we got the parents from the two countries, where they also have games together, to play together, to be together, in order for getting that tension between the two nationalities out. And we saw the improvement of the Syrian kids had improved because of such getting over that social cohesion together, the two nationalities. After that, we also were contacted by UNESCO, and we had added 3 more schools for this program. So at that year, 2015, we had 9 schools running at the same time, with each one 150 students. And we're also helping teachers, because we do have so many teachers in each school to help these students. After that, we also got into, from 9 schools, we were asked to go jump for 20 schools. And we start the program with 20 schools in different governorates in Jordan. The program is not only education. We had introduced more things with these kids. So we start doing awareness sessions for the students on child protection, which is something very important they were not aware of. So this is something that we got them in. We were also giving them child protection for the kids and for the parents, and to be aware of what's going on. The education part, we have different levels. Level 1, we don't go with the grades, because the system, if they get into the schools in Jordan, they go, for instance, you're 6 years old, you have to be in grade 1. You're 8 years old, you have to be in grade 8, regardless if they went through the first grade and second grade. With us, it's different. We give them a pre-exam, and we see where should we put them. And we don't call it grade, we call it a level. And the reason for that, because if he's 8 years old or 9 years old and starting in grade 1, it is that kid will not be able to stay with us, and then they will leave. Instead, we put them in levels, and this is when we explain to the kids that this is a level. It's not a grade. They will accept it, the parents and the kids. And I always say, for instance, if I want to learn a language, I'm going to go to level 1 or beginner in order for me to improve and get to level 2 and level 3. And this is what we had done with our kids. Our kids, after each year, each cycle, we saw the improvement on these kids. We saw that 84% of our kids who attend 3 days a week had improved. Their improvement was 94% had improved. So the kids at our institute have improved tremendously, and that led them to go for another year. And we have the same kids for another year and another year. Our goal was also to get these kids from a non-formal education to formal education, because if they're going to stay out of school or not attending school, that is not our aim. So we got them streaming these kids back to school, and we succeeded. 50% of our students in the first year have got into formal education. And then in 2018 and 19, we started a program for 28 schools where we have introduced life skills for these girls and boys, and we give them, the important thing in life, like time management, how to manage your life, and so on. And then after 32 hours of training, we get them in to do an initiative that help the community, the surrounding community around them. In 2019, we're just starting a new program, which is the non-formal education. This is for dropout students who have been out of school for 3 years or more, and they have no chance of going back to school. We get them into our program. We give them literacy and numeracy. And after going through 3 different cycles, we get them an equivalent letter to be equal to 9th grade or 10th grade. Those of students who would like to go into the 9th grade and go on to a scholastic, academic life, then we give them the equivalent of 9th grade. Those who wants to go on to vocational, we give them equivalent to 10th grade, and this enables them to get into either a profession by going to vocational or going back to school and finish their high school and then on to a university. We have 30 centers with these dropout students, and we hope to be able to be successful in this program. This is a brief on our programs.
Okay, thank you. We can ask lots of questions that I'm sure you're already thinking about what Lina was introducing briefly. I've just loaded the webpage of what they are doing in MECI. And before we turn to the other side, I would like to remind you, in case you're familiar to that, or look for this in case you are not familiar to that, you haven't heard of it. There has been this news last week, and last week also in the Spanish press, about this initiative of a forensic anthropologist in Italy who has this goal of trying to identify, to give an identity, not trying to identify, but trying to give an identity, plus identifying the corpses of people, women, men, children, who've drowned in the Mediterranean and have been rescued. Their corpses have been rescued. And while doing so, her team came across one of these bags with a corpse of someone they thought could be around 18. They finally found out with the remains that it was a boy, and he must have been 14 when he drowned. And also trying to see, well, to do their job as forensic anthropologists, they came across this kind of bag that was sewed inside the jacket he was wearing. And after they saw these different layers that were stick together, you can imagine they were rescued from the sea, from deep in the sea. They could identify Bulletin de Qualification, yeah? So the grades he had obtained from Mali. So he hoped that that could be his best passport to be welcome in Europe once he reached the peaceful land he was aiming at when he started his this journey that unfortunately ended so badly. So I don't know if you've heard of that, but I think this is a very telling story of how important education is for a kid, even for a 14-year-old who initiates this journey to Europe and wants to improve. It has so many dimensions, and we'll talk about this later, for children who haven't had the opportunity to be in education, those who haven't been in education because of the war, because all this education has been interrupted, or because he never got to start with it. They are eager to do that for very many reasons, but children and human beings are learners, and through learning we try to make sense of our place in the world. So it is much more than getting grades and trying to make it to an incredible future. It's also acquiring a sense of who you are. And I'm telling this story in between to make a smoother transition from instilling hope to what Viola is going to talk about. So do you want to switch place? Or
I think it's fine, but
it's
I
fine?
just need to...
I
just need to open it, and then I think I can stay where... Oops.
Yeah, can I help it?
Yeah, because there are two, so I just want to open mine.
That's it. Okay. Here, I can do it. I can do it. Here?
Okay.
Thank you. So, Viola, the floor is yours now.
Yeah. Thank you, Sylvia, for arranging this session. It's good to be with you here, and I'm not sure if those of you who are in the room are within the educational field or just researching other issues with regard to migration and flight, but this input which I will be giving might focus also on another dimension that was already discussed this morning with regard to the issue of Turkey and the laws regarding migration, but I will not enter so much into it. So first of all, let me say I have some comments on the title because, you know, the MENA region is anything but post-conflict. So actually, I don't think that the MENA region really had a post-conflict era because we transitioned from colonialism, from first of all the Ottoman Empire to Western colonialism, then to national state for Palestine. This does not apply. And now it's the collapse of these national states which were actually formed by the European powers. So we're anything else but post-conflict, and definitely not Syria, which is the country I'm focusing on. This is my first comment. My second comment is talking about education of children in the MENA region is a totally different context than talking about education of children in Europe because of the demographic dimension. So the pyramid of the demography is in Europe like this, while in the Arab world it's like this, since the majority of the population in the Arab world are potential school children. So when we talk about Syria, we talk about before 2011, and I need to make one comment again at the beginning. Whatever I'm referring to with Syria in general, not to education, I'll be very specific, are related to prior to the numbers prior to 2011, because there are no credible numbers whatsoever after the Syrian crisis occurred in 2011, knowing that even before 2011, statistics were always a political instrument, which is nothing Arab, by the way. It's the same all over. So when we're talking about education of children, we're talking about the majority of the community and of society. My third comment is I would like to quote the German researcher Kaltmeier when he said, "Every research undertaking is a political act." So whatever I'm presenting to you is a political act. And it was actually a decision for me to go into this. And my last comment is personal. Actually, I was researching, I've been engaged, you know, socio-political transformation, whatever you want to do, for quite a long time, more focusing on Palestine, which is my country of origin. And then I was fed up with Palestine. And I thought maybe it's good to focus on something else. So I was studying the school textbooks of Syria long before the conflict arose. And when I was researching the image of the other and how it is presented in school textbooks in Syria. And then when I was finished, shortly before, the Syrian conflict arose, and nobody was interested in Syria anymore because everybody was hoping within few weeks Assad will be gone, just like Mubarak and just like Ben Ali, and then it's over and we'll start something new. And so I kept my research aside, and then in 2013 I went back and I said, exactly because of the conflict, I want to do a study that would go monitoring the educational process content-wise during the conflict. And I've been researching this for the last 5.5 years. So I'll be presenting to you some of the outcomes, and it will not be online because with the streaming, because my book is not yet out. So these are materials that I have been so much working on that I don't want to have it on air so often. So the material I will be showing you is mostly regarding my work and research on the education in Syria prior until the end of 2016. And I'll be very specific in a moment. So, okay. So let me start with setting the socio-political context, not only for Syria, but for the whole MENA region. What I've been researching at what I will share with you is in the context of post-Arab, the so-called Arab Spring, which started in 2010 in Tunisia. So just to remind you, because this is the setting. The second point, which is important to understand, is that it comes after the rise of various political Islamic parties to power, mainly in Tunisia and Egypt, with totally different developments later. And in Egypt, because I'll show you, if time permits, some research I've done on Egypt. It's in the context of the political protests and war in Syria, so post-2011. And it's in the context of the rise of, and you see, because ISL, Islamic State in the Levant, that's how it started in 14 in Syria. Then it changed its name to ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and then it dropped geography and remained Islamic State. With regard to Syria, the work I'll be showing you is very much related to the changes after March of 2011, where the protests started. And there we need to be aware that there were two phases, at least to my analysis of the situation. The first 6 months, which were mostly captured by nonviolent resistance by local people from within Syria. And then at the end of the summer of 2011, where everybody was already involved in Syria, sending weapons, sending money, training people, and having foreign fighters also present. So things changed in Syria very dramatically at the end of 2011. Just to make it clear that I'm not the only one, who has the knowledge, I want to quote a Syrian professor in the US who already was talking about the changing of narratives in 2014. So just to make sure, sometimes we as researchers believe we are the only ones holding knowledge. Sometimes it's good to be on the ground. Okay, so when I looked at the Syrian context, I was shocked to see and to monitor how quickly people were interested in changing the content of curricula and textbooks. Much of the research done on Syria or in conflict areas are very much addressed to issues of numbers. How many children were reached? How many children are out of school? How many are dropouts? And I was interested in what are children being taught during times of conflict, coming from a context of conflict. Having been raised under occupation made me very sensitive to what people are being taught at schools. But I will not enter into my personal narrative. So it was interesting for me to record the changes that were happening. So the first change was by the Syrian government itself. After Bashar took over from his father, there were some thoughts of modernizing the curriculum, but the first changes that really were rooted came in the scholastic year 2011-2012. And that is exactly the time where the conflict was at its height at the beginning. And it's interesting to see what was changed. I will show you some of the outcomes. The second revision came from a group which is called Islamic Sham in spring 2013, an NGO, a Syrian NGO based in Turkey, which is, by the way, the case for almost every opposition group focusing on education among Syrians is applicable. And this has to do with the fact, we heard it this morning, that in Turkey you have Turkish as a language, so you need Arabic textbooks. And because of the position Turkey took, the Syrian textbooks were not so much used unless some of the groups were scratching everything that had to do with Ba'ath, and the others were rewriting. So Islamic Sham is one, which is more from political Islamic, if not Salafi oriented. So the texts they publish on religion are more of a Salafi understanding. I'll show you some of the work in a moment. The next group in September 2013 were the Syrian Education Commission, which is again an organization based in Turkey, which was established in Turkey by Syrians, very much near to political Islam, and they rewrote the school textbook. Then the Ministry of Education of the interim government, which was recognized by European countries. Then IS textbooks came in 2015 and 16, and the newest were from the Kurdish Democratic Union Party. So just a nutshell of what was happening while people were fighting. So people were fighting on the ground, and in the arena of education, everybody was fighting on what content are children being taught. And sometimes, people are underestimating what it means to have now, and every second Syrian is either a refugee or an internally displaced. So you can imagine what it means if all children are entering one of these different educational paths, which is approaching the whole narrative of Syria differently, and what it means for a challenge post-conflict if Syria would be a country of sovereignty over its narrative again. I'll show you just to remind you, because now this is an old stuff, but this was an atlas made by the Austrian Federal Ministry of the Interior, which shows, by the way, the gray is the area controlled in 2016 by IS between Syria and Iraq. And this is exactly at the height of my research. And you can see that, we have here, so here is the IS school textbooks. In the red ones here are different opposition groups. In the green areas are the Syrian government. In Turkey, there are others. So you see what it means to be fragmented, also with regard to education. So this is this is the Islamic Sham school textbooks. I have to run now very quickly because I think we don't have so much time. No, okay. The Islamic Sham printed its own school textbooks, which is very much also related to the school textbooks which were very much used in Saudi Arabia. And they distributed it quite heavily in Turkey, also in the so-called temporary protection centers, and later the temporary protection center shifted the school textbooks used and changed to the second one, which will come in a moment. So they were the first to publish, and there are huge numbers about how many were produced, funded almost the majority of these, I would say, religiously curriculums were mostly funded by Qatar, interesting-wise. Mostly from private foundations, so not government, but private foundations. So these are part of the, this is in Turkey, where they've distributed the school bag with the whole school curriculum in it. And this is what students then were being taught. What I focused on was SEC because the Syrian Education Commission was the biggest in terms of its position, but also in terms of the books published and distributed. And these were the school textbooks which were in the temporary protection centers in Turkey, and people were sitting for the final exam according to this curriculum. I will just show you a few things because it's maybe for you boring because I went through all books on geography, history, Islamic religious education, and civics education to see what content have been changed. Because almost all organizations were saying we're only taking out the propaganda of the Ba'ath, which is to a good extent true, but the most important question was for me, what is being put instead of the Ba'ath propaganda? So this is the same page of the same book, yeah? And you see on the right is the official curriculum, and in the new one, you see the changed one. Exactly the same page. So the first thing you see is the change of the flag. So the flag of the opposition is introduced into the new book. So if you're a child that is being in that school, trained in that school, you will believe this is the flag of your country, while if you're here, you will believe this is the flag of your country, and each of the two are denying the opposite. Yeah? And here you see these are demonstrations that were going post-2011. You see up in the, actually both of them are from demonstrations post-2011. And it's from one of the cities up north in Syria, from Afrin. Again, this is the same, and you see here it's the opposite. This is the official, and this is the changed one. And you see here it's talking about the June War and portraying Hafiz al-Assad as the hero of the Arab, region. And there, the newly book shows the city of Qunaitra, which is a Syrian city, destroyed after the war. Which is exactly the same period. They are talking about the same period. Here it's the victorious narrative of the Ba'ath Party, and there it's the narrative saying actually Ba'ath Party was just praising itself for something that was never glorious at all. Again, here you see from some of the books how, and this is primary level. These are part of the demonstrations that were taking place after 2011. I cannot enter into so much of the detail, but it's interesting for me as a religious scholar to see, and a scholar of education, that in the primary school, you are praising people in military clothing and also with weapons. But it's the most important thing, it's what is called, what is being written under the picture. This is a picture that is what is said in the school textbooks, of the Syrian Free Army. So again, it's taking one group from within the opposition and labeling it as the main opposition within Syria, which is actually excluding all others who were also fighting for liberation within Syria, especially those who started it in 2011. So this is a song in first grade that people are taught that at the age of 6, which I thought for me is, you know, it's asking for martyrdom and saying, you know, there are so many you know, hurriyat, what is it? No, you know, maids waiting at the entrance of paradise at the age of 6. So this is part of the narratives that are being taught. This is the first decree by the Islamic State about the new curriculum before it was introduced. And it's very interesting what, you know, they've given all schools 12 points to take into consideration, and I will not go through them, but some of them are very, you know, are very awkward, I would say, because it says, for example, number 9, it doesn't interest you in the Arabic version, but it says, you know, you have to omit everything in mathematics, you know, that can be related to issues of fawaid, profit, you know, or democracy, or elections. Very interesting, you know. Sometimes we underestimate how such groups work when it comes to education.
I'm sorry.
No, yeah. I will not go through them, you know,
No,
taking
clear,
out.
in mathematics, number 9 is the content
That should be taken out from in mathematics.
In mathematics,
yeah.
Avoiding elections, democracy, and profit.
Yeah,
okay.
Which is, you know, they have also, you know, Darwin. Anything that is near, but that is something we know. I mean, that has nothing to do with IS. You can find it by evangelicals as well. So these are the schools IS opened, the so-called schools. It opened in the areas they were controlling, and they were recruiting children at the age of 5, 6. And I've done a huge study on the materials provided by them. And one of the films shocked me, and this is one shot of it, where, you know, they were talking to children of 6 years, and every child was saying, you know, his name is father of. You know, he was 6. And then, you know, what are the grounds on which Islam has been founded? And then they would just, you know, repeat a 12-point IS indoctrinated understanding of Islam, which is actually not there in the pluralistic context of Islam. And I had to say, when I was researching this part, it was many of the IT office at my university said if the police would enter our department, he would know whom they are looking for, because I was all of the time researching websites which are usually blocked or observed. I'll finish in a moment. This is from the English textbooks. After I finished my work, there was a special study done on the IS school books, and if you're interested in them, I can just invite you to look into the study done under the title "Inside the Caliphate's Classroom," which was published 2016 by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and there are many examples of the English lessons. And this is part of the PYD textbooks on history, and you can see Öcalan's picture. So it's rewriting the narratives of the whole region. I took so much time, and I think it's very confusing, but I would just like you to, I will not go into Egypt. I think I will leave Egypt at the moment. What we underestimate is that even in Egypt, during the time of the political Islam on power with Morsi, the school textbooks were changed. So you can just leave that because it's not so important. No. You can go back to...
Oh, back. Sorry.
It's okay. Oh, it's okay. I didn't want to... You can go to the last one. It's okay. Yeah, you can just stay there. So, take that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Oh.
This is thank you in Arabic. Okay. So, just to summarize, I think just to knowing that almost every second Syrian has been, every Syrian has been affected by the war. But every second Syrian is affected in terms of the place he or she is living in and the educational, whatever content they are being provided with. So when it comes to post-conflict, the major challenge for Syria would be rewriting a narrative that would be inclusive of a Syria that has been diverse ethnically, religiously, throughout history, in a time where whatever has been going on for the last 8 years has been strengthening anti-pluralistic, anti-diversity narrative of whatever Syria is for whatever group we're talking about. Thank you, and sorry for taking so much time.
No. Thank you. Thank you very much, Viola. I think we are rushing unnecessarily because, as I said at the beginning, we were having a third speaker who, in fact, should have spoken before the two guest speakers from abroad to set the scene. So as we are not having this third speaker, we, in fact, have more time. We can go back to the presentations and revisit some of the issues you just raised in more depth, etc. So now we have the floor open for any questions, remarks, etc. that you might want to raise and ask our guests here. And we are not in a hurry at all because, as I said, there's no third speaker. I say this because I received some tip that which we should hurry up, and maybe you were accelerated unnecessarily, but it doesn't matter. So we can go back to anything that was raised and also raise the interest of our audience. So now the floor is yours, and I hope, there's one person already. Maybe another one. We may collect some of the remarks and questions, maybe two of them, and then we can proceed with another round. Okay? So, please, can you say who you are and what are you working with?
Okay. My name is Maria Jose Almeida. I'm studying international studies in University of Barcelona. Thank you very much for this incredible presentation. And I want to ask you a question to Viola Rahef. Well, as you were saying, the textbooks are clearly shows that Syria is fragmented. So I was wondering do you think this fragmentation could be a consequence of the borders that were imposed by England and France, and that this mixture of these borders, that the design of these borders totally affect the composition, the ethnic composition of how maybe the Arab countries have to be, but they are not because of this imposition. And also, as Syria now is in a civil war, do you think this civil war could be a consequences of this thing? Or maybe this is an international conflict that seems to be a civil war. So.
Okay, thank you. Just to be sure, is the second question related to this first one? No, not at all. Then maybe I'd prefer. I think it's more useful that you address this first question separately. Thank you.
Well, first of all, civil war, I mean, there are different descriptions given to whatever happened to Syria after 2011. Some talk about civil war, some don't agree on the concept of civil war. I think I'm a person who believes it's up to the Syrians, once it is over, to determine what actually happened in Syria. Because part of colonization is also colonization of the mind. And it's very interesting to see how much research have been funded with regard to Syria, where people who have no idea of Syria whatsoever are now experts in Syria. So that's why I would leave it for Syrians to decide whatever that era was. But the conflict was definitely internationally fired and led, because unless the funding was given to the various groups to fight, this conflict would not have been possible to last for almost 8 years, and we entered just the 8th year. You know, everybody was involved and is still involved in Syria. Actually, the Syrians themselves are on the margin meanwhile. Now a new arena of conflict has emerged, which is who will rebuild the future Syria. Because war is almost over, and now the winners of the war will decide who's allowed to participate in making money and profit out of rebuilding Syria. This is the new arena which will be opened very soon. Well, the history of the European colonialism in the area is definitely part of what has happened, and you can see it in different elements. Because it's interesting that the Syrian curriculum prior to all of these events, which were mostly written in the 60s, at a time where the Ba'ath Party was at its height, were mostly setting itself in the context of the whole region with regard to the Arab-Israeli conflict, and the whole development of the region in the last 500 years. It's interesting that in the new books, especially from the political Islam rooted groups, Turkey is not seen, and the era of the Ottoman Empire is not seen as an occupation era. So it's rewriting a history of 500 years ago in a new light. There was, part of the conflict with Turkey, and I guess the colleague is from, I heard you're from Turkey. Part of the narrative was the part of up north Syria, which was given by the French to Turkey, which was always in the Syrian narrative an occupied area, which is now changed. You see in the former school textbooks were drawing the lines, but saying this, it's not here, saying this area, yeah. So we're talking about Antakya here, this area, and you see in the old textbooks that there is a line showing that this was at a certain era Syria, and was given by the French to Turkey. In the new ones by the opposition, you don't see that at all. It's already taken in for granted. So there are different things that are being even rewritten from from today's perspective on the 500 years back, which is the interesting debate. Are you part of the Islamic Ummah in your narrative, or are you part of the Arabic Ummah? So these are part of the contested elements at the moment. And I think it's interesting because it's happening all over. That's why I think the MENA region is in a deep crisis with regard to what identity is trying to be forced, even retrospective. I hope I answered you.
Yeah, thank you. So before we pass to the second question, I wanted to make a small remark that I remember when we visited your programs in Jordan, we were wondering whether there were no social studies or history or geography in the subjects. So it was art, of course, and music, and we understand that why, and PE, physical education, and maths and languages. But what about the common history? It's so complicated, so I don't know if you would like to add just a remark on that before we pass over to the second.
Well, we felt that the students who already are coming from a conflict area, these are refugees, crossing a border, gone through a lot of trauma, that we felt we don't want to give them any more of history, no more geography. We are all in one country. It's enough of trauma for them. So we felt that only giving them the languages and the math is the most important part for such age, because they don't need to know all this history. They're going to grow up at one time and know all this, what they're going through or what the Arab world is going through. That's why we didn't introduce the geography and history.
Yeah, thank you.
Even at a later age, our group is from 6 to 12, but even the second group, which is 13 to 18, we still don't give them any kind of history or geography.
It would be so complicated. In case you did not notice that she did not mention those subjects, I wanted to stress that intentionally. So, second question, please.
Firstly, thanks to both of you, because I think it's really, really interesting what you are explaining us. And I would like to make a few questions to Lina Farouki. Firstly, I would like to know more about the last program addressed to children who drop out of school, and how you developed the program for them, and which are the challenges and difficulties that you face in the program, but also which are the expectations of these youth refugees, and which are also the difficulties they experience, and how they can manage or overcome them.
Well, the Dropout program, it's really an extremely important one. It's not only for refugees, it will be given for refugees as well as for the Jordanians. All our programs are open for both nationalities, as well as any other nationality that comes into our school. And the reason for that is that we don't want at the age of 6 and 7 and 8 to tell them you are, because with our approvals from the government, which takes a lot of time, but they specifically say 30% are Jordanian, 70% are Syrians. So when you have a Yemeni coming, or Egyptian or Sudani, it's so hard to tell them you're not in our program because you are such a nationality. So we get them to the program. The Dropout is for students who have no hope to go back to school. They've been out of school for 3 years, and they're just sitting at home not doing anything, and they're very vulnerable, because these students could go into, ISIS can come and ask them, give them a couple things and they're going to go with. They could go into drugs, they could go into killing people, and that's why it's very hard to attract these students back. But the only way we're attracting them back is that giving them a certificate, a certified certificate, or a equivalency letter that's equal to 10th grade. Anyone who has dropped out of school cannot go to any kind of work without this equivalency letter to 10th grade, and this is how we're attracting them. Even going to the military, which is usually thinking that anyone can get, if he's a failure, can get into military. They can't get into military work or even simple military part or policeman. And that's why this is part of what's good about our program, is we give them a certificate that they can go in and work in any other place. One of the students that I saw in one of the schools, he said even going and working as not a salesperson, but in a regular shop, they're asking him for a 10th grade equivalent letter. So this is part of attracting the students. So this is an advantage. The challenges we have is getting to explain to these students that you're going to be coming to our program 5 days a week, 2 hours per day, and it is 3 cycles. Each cycle is 8 months. This is part of the challenges that we will be facing. And the least of that person to be in our program is 16 months, which is two cycles. But we'll just have to keep trying and convince these students to stay with us. And, at the end of the program, what they are getting. Expectation, for me, I said we're supposed to have 750 students in this program. If 10 students, imagine, out of this program will be getting their high school diploma and then on to university, this means this is a very successful program. The rest is to get, all of the rest is to get into vocational training. And this is what as soon as we got approval from the government to implement this program, we start working on all vocational centers around each center, our centers, in order to accommodate these students as soon as they finish the non-formal or dropout program, is immediately to be accepted in a vocational training center to get a certified program, which means whether they're going to be carpenter, whatever, is to get the certificate as well to get that program.
There's also an addition in relation to the question, is then the possibility for youngsters from other countries not only to access the program, of course, but then to be hired officially? So do they have the right? How does it work? To work? Yeah, I know the answer.
Other nationalities, I don't know if they can work, but every year we have a new regulation. Like if I can say 2 years ago, not a single refugee can work, but now they are with London and Brussels meetings. They are approving a number of work permits per year for other nationalities and mainly the Syrian refugees. I hope that by the time we finish this program, which is 16 months from now, we will be able to accommodate the number of Syrian students that finish the program and go on to the technical one, is to find them a job that they can work at. This is a government regulation. These are part of the challenges that we have. We cannot go behind or over this, but we try our best to find a market for them as well.
Thank you. So more questions, more remarks, more. Yes, another one there. Thank you. You have to use the mic, so that we're streaming that.
First of all, thank you very much for both presentations. I will ask a really obvious question to Viola. As Egypt is not geographic, the power distribution is not similar to Syria in terms of Egypt, and the makeup of the geographical space is not similar. And you couldn't expand on the Egyptian textbooks. How do you draw similarities between the two contexts in terms of the textbooks? Can you expand on it a little bit?
Yeah.
Shall I look for the slide?
Just a second. I will actually. when I said I want to do something on the content, at that time I was already working at the university, but I wanted to do my doctorate on that, and nobody believed that it would be possible to prove that content is being changed while conflict is going on. And the first thing I did was actually studying the Jordanian, the Egyptian, sorry. The Jordanian, I looked on the issue on other element, but I will not present today. You know, I'll tell you maybe something very personal. You know, I was born in 69 in Palestine, so 2 years after the Israeli occupation started. So my whole school career was under Israeli occupation. And I remember in history or geography, you know, all of a sudden the pages were jumping from 10 to 21, so it wasn't helpful for math. And nobody was talking about it, but we knew that in these 11 pages there was something on Palestine which the Israeli monitoring took out so that we do not learn something about our history. That's why content was for me always relevant. And during Egypt, it was important for me to look on what happens when political Islam comes to power with regard to education. And I'll show you part of it because here I only have, yeah, you have to, yeah. So we have already, you know, the 25th January revolution coming. And, you know, the government was there, the new government, after Mubarak left and after the elections came, and then Morsi was elected. Within 3 months, the government of Morsi could introduce a new curricula, which is not applicable even to European countries. It's impossible, almost impossible, to revise a whole educational curricula from grade 1 to 12 by 3 months. And then the military coup happened, and again, the school textbooks were changed within few months. So I'll just, so under Morsi, you know, one of the first decisions with education he took was appointing a commission for school textbooks revision. I mean, can you imagine, the country is a mess, and somebody is, one of the first things is the school textbooks, to free them again from the propaganda of Mubarak's government. The same narrative as in Syria, you know, free them out of the propaganda. They changed 20% of the content of the school textbooks, and in the center of interest was the history narrative of Egypt and the role of the Muslim Brothers. It's very interesting. Yeah? So this is one of the, you know, one of the examples. I will not go into that. I published a long article on that, but unfortunately only in German, I'm sorry. But you can see here, this is first grade. It's learning the alphabet, you know? And so all of a sudden, the L stands for the beard, you know, and there are other very interesting, you know. So it's, you know, that's why I think we need to be more aware of what happens to the content. Sometimes we're happy people are learning, but what they are learning doesn't concern us so much. And then, you know, after the coup, the government came and they destroyed all the books through the Morsi area. I wanted actually to study them all from grade 1 to 12. It was impossible because they have been already burned, everything. I was looking at, for example, in history, the women who fought for the national liberation in Egypt were taken out by the Morsi government. Every single woman which was mentioned in history was taken out. Duriya Shafiq, for example, which is a very important figure in the history of Egypt, was just taken out. Then the new textbooks were revised and written, and again, it's reshaping a new narrative for Egypt. So I think the most important thing on both sides, and this is actually bringing them again together, is, there is a rewriting of a national narrative, retrospective on the past, but also on the role of those in power in coming to where we are now. And these are parts of the things that are very challenging in a context where the national identity and national unity, which was the first question, is at stake as such. So these were part, because I can't introduce all of the work I have done on Egypt, but it applies actually at the moment. I'm just finishing one on Palestine, what Hamas did to the school textbooks, which is almost one-to-one. So what I'm trying to say is this is not only Syria. This happens, and this is not only the Arab world in the crisis.
Catalonia.
Exactly. So we know that. We know that. And I think it's important to be alert on what does research do in times of crisis when it comes to national narratives yeah.
Viola, I think you have to reserve some of the dates in your agenda for the next year, because you're going to be invited to present all the outcomes of what you're just letting us know.
This book, the book on Syria, is, I hope, out in 4 weeks.
Okay.
I hope very much, which is a 500-page study, which will be out in 4 weeks. And the one on Palestine, on Egypt, just came out, and on Palestine, I hope, in the coming months. And I think it's part of the responsibility we carry as researchers from the region to be, to take part, even though we're now living somewhere else. But that's, yeah.
That's great. Any other question, remark, doubt? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you both for very interesting presentations. Yes, sorry. Thank you both for the very interesting presentation. Education.
I'm sorry if I was very gloomy in my presentation, but you know, sometimes it's important to know what you're facing so that you will be able to transform it. And secondly, I know that you know, presenting such a content is not always easy because some people, and Sylvia was in one discussion where some person told me, a colleague, you know, this is very dangerous because even funding might stop. But this is the ethical responsibility we carry, and that's why I said every research undertaking is a political act. So I'm aware of what I'm doing, that's why I know that it's very gloomy, but that's the only way, in my understanding, that we'll be able to capture what is happening. Because the problem is, once Syria will be in a post-conflict era, one will go back to the last curriculum to build the new one. But nobody would know that that last one has been reshifted during war. And that's why, you know, it's shifting sands, and I was trying to capture that shifting in the sand while it was happening. So I think that what you were saying, I mean, you were born and raised in Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't have a unified history curricula because they can't agree on one, because the different groups have different understanding of the narrative of history due to civil war. And that's why, depending on which school you are in, you're being taught that. Now, being a Palestinian is another. So that's even something totally different, yeah? Exactly, that's why, because nobody can agree on that narrative, yeah? But that's why, you know, you have then a different national narrative that cannot be unified to all. And in Syria, this will be definitely one of the challenges in the future, especially in the era to come. I didn't go into many of the content because I can't show you much of the content. But part of the way, for example, the Alawite community is presented in the textbooks of the opposition is, for me as a researcher in religious studies, totally worrying, because it's dehumanizing the other. So there are so many elements that needs to be captured in that. And when we talk about Turkey, we have to recognize that you have various curriculums of the opposition that are being used in Turkey, because Turkey until 2016 did not react very quickly to the issue of school textbooks because of the Arabic language. So it just, whatever funding came, if that person opened a school, he was bringing the curricula. If you opened a school, you would be bringing the curricula, which was a disaster at the peak where Turkey had the biggest number. Lebanon and Jordan did not allow, and that's why they don't face that problem, because they are not allowed to bring the school textbooks. You have to use the Jordanian school textbooks. And so the governments are in control of what's being taught in the school. That's why civic education and history is not relevant to that issue also.
It is true, it's a small initiative, but if we do have, and for us, we had gone through around 25,000 students that between refugees and Jordanian, because we do have to go with that ratio. But if there's 10 other NGOs are doing the same thing, we could reach a good number of students. So the more we have as programs like this, the more important, and we could, help all these students. And we all know that the number of students who are, or the number of refugees who came to Jordan are way at the early age, are way above the ages. I think 81.5% of the refugees who entered Jordan are children, and 18.5% are adults and old people. So we really need such programs to be done in Jordan, and not only in Jordan, Lebanon, and I'm sure in Turkey, for those students they need or they seek our help and get them into education.
Thank you to you also. Anyone else? There's a lot to think about, I think. So maybe we should end it here. And again, I thank you very much for having attended the session. I hope it has reached your expectations. I'm sure it has overcome and surpassed your expectations. And thank you very much to both Lina Farruki and Viola Raheb for this wonderful presentation and these learnings direct from the field of intervention and research. Thank you very much.